Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And we're here to discuss the double portion, Chukat and Balak, which cover Numbers chapters 19 verse 1 through 25 verse 9. So it's a double portion, and it's over
Packed.
6 chapters. It is packed so much. So we're going to hit a few highlights.
Right. We're not going to be able to unpack
No.
every story because it's just too much.
It is. But one of the things we want to do before we even get into the discussion is that we have something exciting to share about Torah Today Ministries. Some of you have discovered this already, but we have an album available on wherever you get your internet music, whether it's Apple Music or Amazon Music
YouTube?
or Spotify or YouTube, and I think there's 150 different outlets. And this album is called the Siddur Project. Siddur is S-I-D-D-U-R, and Siddur, as you know, is a Hebrew prayer book. Years ago, I invited our two dear friends from England, Gary and Lynn Preston, to read the morning and evening prayers. And it's all in English.
They have prettier voices than
they
we do.
They have beautiful voices. And so we've had those on the Beth Tikkun Messianic Fellowship website for years. But one of our board members, Kamal Sampara, is a dear friend and a very gifted composer. We put our heads together, and I suggested that he put these to music. He have some background music.
And boy, did he
my goodness.
to that
and a matter of a couple months.
Wonderful.
Yeah, he composed 32 tracks, musical tracks, to go beneath the words, to support the words, and it is absolutely beautiful. So wherever you go online to get your music, just type in the Siddur Project, and you'll see it. Now, there is another album on there called the Siddur Project, which is a lady singing the prayers, and it's quite beautiful too. But you'll notice the difference.
Our album cover is blue.
It's
correct?
blue.
Okay.
But there's also a second album that has a golden color. Other than that, it looks the same. And it's just the music without the prayers. So you can use that as background for your own prayer time or
your
dinner
Sabbath
music
evening.
Or whatever you want to use it for. So anyways, I just wanted to put that little plug out there because this has already been a blessing to so many people.
Yeah, we don't want anyone to miss it.
I don't want you to miss out. Okay, we need to get to the Torah.
We do.
All right, so
Chukat, which means the statutes.
The statutes, and it starts off with this strange, bizarre thing that the Midrash says even Solomon could not understand
because it's too lofty.
It doesn't seem to make sense. It seems
doesn't.
self-contradictory, and that's about the red heifer. Now, the purpose of this red heifer was it would be killed, its ashes gathered, mixed with water, and then sprinkling this on people who were unclean by coming into contact with a dead body.
But the process of preparing it makes you ritually impure.
Yeah, it makes you impure. Everybody involved, the deputy high priest who would kill the red heifer, the one who burns the red heifer, that's in chapter 19, verse 8, the one who gathers the ashes in verse 9, and the one who sprinkles the ashes in verse 21, all of them, by being involved in producing these purifying ashes, all become defiled in the process.
It's so strange.
So strange. And so how is it that killing this red heifer, gathering its ashes, burning it, gathering the ashes, sprinkling them, makes you unclean, but if you're the one receiving these ashes, it makes you ritually pure?
It's obviously some divine metaphor.
It is. And of course, what is that metaphor,
It's
Robin?
our Messiah.
It's Messiah.
Of course.
Because think about it. Everything about Yeshua's death was sin.
And he became sin for us, literally.
The accusations made against him, the horrible trial, the fake trial that was such a fraud, all the ones involved in that trial,
He represented everything that was false.
The Judas,
in the world,
his betrayal,
he took it upon himself.
That was sin. The Roman soldiers who crucified him, that was sin. The ones at the foot of the cross mocking him,
and he let it happen.
That was sin. Everything involved in his death was sin.
Right.
Yet, what comes out of that?
Redemption.
Salvation. So everyone who now comes in contact with the risen Messiah is made pure.
Wow.
So there is the picture that the red heifer paints, that the rabbis and sages for centuries have not been able to make heads or tails of.
And we could spend hours talking about why cows, why red, why, and why no yoke upon it. What is interesting that might be worth mentioning, Grant, is we had a company recently, a gentleman who has been to Israel very recently and has a particular interest in this red heifer process, and he was sharing with us that there are several contenders now.
Yes.
And that they think possibly there are some calves that may be able to fill the role of this perfect red heifer, which those of us who are waiting for the return of Messiah realize that could be a key to begin the sacrifices once again.
Because the one thing that stands in the way of the priesthood reestablishing itself is the ashes of the red heifer, which would make the men ritually pure so that they could begin to once again serve as priests. So that is the one thing, that's the key that unlocks the sacrificial system moving forward.
You know, it's another one of these places in the Word where it's tempting to dismiss something that doesn't make sense as not making sense. But we have to remember His ways are so much higher than our ways.
Yes.
And the reason it doesn't make sense is there are things that we don't yet see or understand.
Yes.
So we have to rise toward it and realize there is something beautiful here to see.
Absolutely.
And we pray for divine insight.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we were talking about yesterday, Grant, is that it was taken outside the camp, right?
Yes, and in the days of the temple, that place would be the Mount of Olives.
Right.
The very place where Yeshua would go to pray.
Right, right.
And it's interesting that this decree about the red heifer falls here in the Torah, because again, these ashes are for purifying someone who's come into contact with a dead body. Well, if you recall, just a few chapters earlier,
there were a lot of dead bodies.
Yes, and God has decreed that the Israelites are going to spend the remainder of their 40 years in the wilderness. And if my calculations are correct, there would be about 1,000 funerals a day.
Sheesh.
1,000 funerals a day. So a lot of people are coming into contact with dead bodies.
Well, speaking of the wilderness, I would like to kind of give context for the next portion of our portion, because between the end of chapter 19 of Numbers and the beginning of chapter 20, where we begin to read about Miriam and Aaron's passing, 39 years pass.
39 years pass. So mark that in your Bibles. Between the end of 19 and the beginning of 20, 39 years.
And the reason that's so significant is we picture this people who have experienced so much, leaving Egypt, coming to Sinai, receiving the Torah, moving through the wilderness, going in circles, arguing, murmuring, working through, hopefully things within them are dying in the wilderness.
Yes.
And then they come right to the edge of the Jordan.
Yeah, right to the edge. And then the final big test, the final big temptation from
and Canaan's right there.
It's right there.
Right across
the Jordan's river. Only, what?
They can see
20, 30 yards wide. It's not like the Mississippi River. It's just it's not much more than a deep creek in places.
Yeah.
But one of the things that has been impressed upon me for years, I'm always trying to impress it on others, is that this wilderness experience that the Israelites went through is something that is unavoidable. There are no shortcuts in going from the Egyptian slavery to sin, and going into the land of promise, the places of victory and fruitfulness. Everybody goes through the wilderness. And the only way out of the wilderness is to go through the wilderness.
And it's purposeful.
It is purposeful.
It's intentional.
It's the place where God takes us to change our minds.
And we can resist or we can cooperate.
Yes. And what it does, it's the place where the old dies and the new grows up and matures and takes its place. And that's what took place here. The old generation that was cowardly and weak and faithless, they died. The new generation, those 20 years old and younger, grew up and took their place. And I know in my own life, and I'm sure in your lives as well, there are parts of you that may still be in Egypt in slavery. There are parts of you that have already crossed into the promised land and you're experiencing victory and fruitfulness.
But then there's a big
there's parts of you that are still in the wilderness, learning how not to rely on your own logic and human reasoning, but learning how to rely upon God's word and develop true courage. Because the land of Israel, the promised land, is a place where cowards need not apply. Only the courageous get to go across.
And he equipped them and supplied them with everything they needed. All the food and water came at just the right time, but they got to the point where they considered his provision not suitable, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And they thought, it's not good enough, we need something different, we need something more, we're too uncomfortable, this is too hard.
It's a place where the whining has to be dealt with. No whining in the land of Israel.
Right.
Now, if you want to understand the wilderness, there's a passage you go to.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's in Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy chapter 8, first 6 verses.
Why don't you just share that?
Okay. And so mark that down and just memorize the reference. Deuteronomy 8, 1 through 6. When you're going through your own wilderness, whether it's in a marriage or in a job, trying to raise kids or trying to learn to play an instrument, you go through this dry kind of a struggle.
And it's important to realize it's not because something's wrong with you.
No,
it's life.
It's what we have to go through.
Yeah.
So here's what it says. God is speaking. He says, all the commandments that I am commanding you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which Adonai swore to give to your forefathers. And you shall remember all the way which Adonai your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might, here we go, humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you, and he let you be hungry, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Adonai. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. In other words, he's saying, you go through the wilderness, I'll take care of you. Just don't whine. Just be courageous.
And
go through.
Don't accuse me.
I'll give you everything you need.
Not showing up.
Yeah. Thus you are to know in your heart that Adonai your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of Adonai your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. So when we go into the wilderness, we tend to do things our way and fear everything but God. When we come out of the wilderness, we do things God's way and fear nothing but him. That's the purpose of the wilderness, to change our minds, to make us a courageous and trusting people.
And to teach us what's real.
Yes.
Speaking of real and not real, I can't help but mention, we're down here in Texas visiting our kids, and they have this crazy game. It's a VR or a virtual reality game. And they insisted that we try it and put this helmet on, right?
Right.
And Grant went first, and it's the most crazy, strange experience, isn't it?
It is so bizarre.
You put this helmet on, and you have the controller in your hand, and suddenly you are in a world that only your head sees, but in your head, it's absolutely real.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But for anyone observing, it's obvious that you are experiencing something that's virtual and not real.
Yeah.
But you and I found it an intriguing
yes.
way to understand life.
Yes. You know, I put this thing on. He has this miniature golf game where you're in Atlantis under the ocean. But anyways, so you look around, no matter whether you look up or down or behind you, you see this city, and there are fish swimming past your head. You're in it. But the thing is, you can go up. And so I went up, and I'm looking down hundreds of feet, and I see buildings under my feet. And it was really freaky. And so I had to stop and think, now wait a minute. Do I believe what my eyes see? Or do I close my eyes, and then I can hear Robin laughing at me because she sees the reality.
And you can hear Josh saying, Dad, push this button, and then you
I can feel the floor under my feet. So I do believe what I see, or do I believe what I hear and what I know to be true? And I thought, this is exactly how life is here in this world. This world is a virtual reality helmet.
And in the wilderness, God had told the people what is real and true and how to walk through it. But their eyes kept seeing things and their flesh kept experiencing things that started to feel more real to them. And so they got distracted and no longer were able to be connected to the source of reality, the Creator.
Oh, we were laughing. Sasha, our daughter-in-law, was talking about Josh having our son wearing this helmet and playing this game. And Josh went to dodge something in the game.
A zombie or something.
And he hit the hearth and tripped over and fell down. So he believed what wasn't real. And he quickly found out, then he discovered what was real. And I think of the spies in the wilderness, going into the promised land rather, and they believed what their eyes saw.
Well,
instead of what God says.
And as we read through this Torah portion, I'm reminded that as we sit and we watch them, how they react to the things that are happening to them, and they're allowing their eyes to lie to them, we can see how they're responding, go, no, 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 don't do that. That is not what's really happening. And I'm reminded that when I'm sitting in the living room the other night and you have that virtual reality helmet on, what you were doing looked so silly.
Oh yeah, you could see the reality.
You're swatting at things that I couldn't see because they don't really exist, and you're pointing at things that in your mind exist, but I could see clearly they don't exist.
I was playing miniature golf in Atlantis.
And it made sense to you. So we say all this because God has called us to hear what He has said is true, and to remember it and not be led away by what our eyes see and what our physical world is telling us is true. You know, Grant, when they came to Sinai, God revealed to them what is true.
Yes.
And He told them, you have a choice between life and death. And life means attaching to nothing other than what is real. And what is real? It's that which never changes.
Yes, the invisible world,
the
world
invisible world that you can't see. It's the one that is eternal and never changes.
It's the 99% world.
Exactly.
You know, one of the things, I didn't share this with you, Robin, but I was thinking later, when I had that helmet on, I can't see you, I can't see Josh or Sasha or the grandkids. All I see is Atlantis and my little miniature golf game and fish flying, swimming by, but I was surrounded by a cloud of witnesses.
You were. We were watching.
Who were in the real world watching me.
And occasionally Grant would say, or one of our son would say, Dad, you got to do this. You got to push that button. And you were like, what button? Oh, this button. And then you were able to get out of it or make a move.
Right. And what we need to do is we need to every day take off the virtual reality helmet of this world.
Yes.
And put our heads into the yoke of Torah. And see the real world, meditate on the Word of God, spend time in prayer with our Creator, and remind ourselves of what is real. And that's what the Sabbath day is for, once a week.
And we have to do that to some extent every day, Grant, because daily, it is an experience that He's taking us through that requires us to stretch and remember and hear.
We're always, don't believe everything you see. Believe what is true. And this is why God says, hear, O Israel. You know, in other words, close your eyes. Don't trust what you see. Hear Israel, the Lord our God. The Lord is one. The Lord is the one with whom we have to do. In him we live and move and have our being. It may look like it's out here in the world, but it's not. It's this world passes away. It's the 1% world. It's a virtual.
Right.
It's like a moth-eaten cloth, like a mist, like a vapor, the word says.
So getting back to the portion, they experienced the fiery serpent, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that right now because we come up to the edge of the Jordan, and there are two final enemies.
Oh, yeah, this is so important.
Are their big obstacle to passing over to a really abundant life.
That's right.
The goal, Canaan.
Yes.
And what are those two?
Well, when you come to chapter 21,
right,
there are two enemies. These two enemies are they're compatriots. They're Ammonites, but there are two kings. And you've got the Sichon in the southern part of the Jordan, on the east bank of the Jordan.
And he's mentioned in verse 21.
And Og in the northern part. And these two form the barrier the people have to get through before they can cross the Jordan.
And the thing that is so fascinating about this is that those are the main two spiritual enemies that are constantly trying to block our way
daily
to get to where God wants us to be.
Yes. I did a teaching on this, well, a couple different times, going through the Torah portions on the Beth Tikkun website. But I'll summarize it fairly quickly here. But Sichon in the south, everything about him represents human logic, human reasoning. Everything about him. And he lived in a place called Cheshbon. Cheshbon means to think or to reason.
Now, this doesn't mean that God doesn't want us to think.
No.
But when we're reasoning against what he has told us is true, that is the enemy.
Right. Human reasoning is good when it comes to executing God's will, but it's worthless in trying to figure out and discern what is God's will. But when you look at the words of the towns, the names of the towns and the people, he's a king of the Amorites. An Amorite, it means a talker. He's the king of the talkers. His name, Sichon, means to sweep away. And how many people have swept away faith and truth in the scriptures because their human reasoning says, that's just a bunch of myths. They sweep it away.
And there's so much talking, so much noise right now doing that very thing.
Right.
Not only inside my head, but outside my head.
Right. And again, Cheshbon comes from the root chashav, which means to think. And the other enemy is Og. Og the giant.
What a name.
His name means round or cake.
Wow.
He lived in Bashan, which means soft, sandy soil. And Edrei, which is good pasture. And the one description we have of Og is found over in Deuteronomy 3, verse 11. And look at how it describes his size. It describes the size of his bed, the place where he lays down and sleeps.
Okay, there's a picture for us.
For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. It is an Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits and its width 4 cubits by the ordinary cubit. So how is he described? His bed. So what we see, these two enemies represent human reasoning,
arguing against the truth,
and addiction to comfort. And I have found so many well-intentioned believers not be able to cross into the land that flows with milk and honey, the land of victory and of fruitfulness, because their human reasoning wouldn't allow them, and they were just too addicted to comfort. I want to do things my way.
Or when God puts an obstacle in front of me, I have an opportunity for my soul to grow and to grow spiritually. But in order to grow spiritually, it requires exercise and working against the resistance of my own comfort. Grant, I've become convinced of something. We cannot grow spiritually unless we are being stretched out of our comfort zone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, there are two things I hear believers say, and my little spidey senses light up.
Well, we do it too.
We do. And we catch each other. We catch each other.
We do.
But one thing is when God's trying to move someone into doing something, I hear one of two responses. One is, well, I just can't see it. I just don't see it. Well, close your eyes and listen to God so you can hear it. So you know what he wants. Quit looking with your eyes. The other thing is, well, I'm not comfortable with that.
Or it's just too hard for me.
As if comfort is what we're called to.
Right. Go to the gym and try to make progress getting stronger if you're not willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to take a nap on the weight bench.
Yeah.
You know, comfort, who cares if you're comfortable? We're not called to comfort. We're called to accomplish his work, to accomplish his will.
Now, we're not talking about self-imposed misery here.
No.
Let's describe what we're talking about.
Well, I'll tell you what self-imposed misery is. When you try to live a life that's purely comfortable, you will be miserable.
Yeah.
If you want to feel good about your life, do what's right. If you don't like the way you feel, change what you're doing. And you know, if we follow God, we're going to have a sense of purpose and accomplishment and joy and intimacy with him. I don't know of any better experience in my life than when I have followed God and been obedient to him. But
because he gives us pleasures in life, and he gives us the rest we need, and he gives us joy and peace and all those things that we crave. But it does require going against the natural tendency of that soul that wants to listen to what is drawing us. I want to eat more. I want to sleep more. I want to drink more. I want to experience this with these people who might not believe in God, but they're more fun. Those kind of voices.
That's right. We know the scriptures tell us that his right hand are pleasures evermore. But to get there, you got to go through the wilderness, and you've got to conquer that addiction to comfort and human reasoning.
And it's different for every person. I mean, for some people, it's uncomfortable to spend time alone. For other people, it's uncomfortable to spend time with others that they need to learn from. So moving out of our comfort zone often goes against our natural wiring, because God wants us to stretch. Right? And trust.
You know, I thank God for a lesson I learned early in life, and that's when my parents insisted I learn to play the piano. And I remember being 8 years old when I started lessons, and I pretty much hated it. And Mrs. Thomas would come, and she had this big yellow number 2 pencil. It never got shorter. And she would whack my fingers if I hit the same wrong note a couple times in a row. She would whack it.
And you begged to quit.
Oh, I begged to quit. But Mom and Dad said, we expected you to want to quit, but you're not going to. And I am so grateful that they didn't let me quit. They forced me through that wilderness.
The discomfort of practicing and doing what you didn't feel like brings you the freedom of being able to enjoy beautiful music.
And then I got to the place later where I wanted to play the piano so much I didn't do other things I needed to do. So I had to learn to put aside that pleasure to do other things that had to be done. But
Sichon and Og, we just couldn't miss describing. Is there anything else to add?
Well, there's tons of stuff to add.
Description
with Sichon and Og.
Of getting past these enemies.
But no one enters the promised land of promise, without defeating those two enemies: human reasoning and addiction to comfort. There's just simply no way around them.
And they want to block our path every day.
Yeah.
They do. But now...
You know what? We've got 2 minutes left to talk about Balaam.
We've got to
talk about
Balaam. My goodness.
Yeah, we haven't even made the second Torah portion yet, have we?
What a story. Balaam.
Yeah.
Another story that seems so strange and hard to understand, because Balaam was a man of mixture. That's what I call him.
Yes.
He was a mixed bag. Absolutely. Because he was a prophet.
Right.
He had a gift.
Some rabbis say he had a gift of prophecy on the level of Moses.
Can you imagine?
But the difference was Moses was humble.
He wasn't humble. Right. Balaam was self-serving.
Oh, yes.
So self-serving that we're warned in the New Testament scriptures over and over not to be like him.
Well, just in a nutshell, Balak, who the Israelites had no gripe against. They didn't plan to attack him, but Balak was afraid of the Israelites. And so he hires this prophet Balaam to come and curse the Israelites. And you all know the story, I'm sure.
But if we don't...
But if you don't, you need to read it.
Right.
You need to go and read it. And so it starts in Numbers chapter 22. So he hires Balaam to go and curse the Israelites. So when his messengers, Balak's messengers, come to Balaam, he says, well, they offer him all this money to go curse Israel. He says, well, wait here, let me go ask God. So he goes before God. God says, don't you dare go with them. So he goes out and says, I can't go. Sorry, it won't happen. Well, they come back later with more money.
So then Balaam's like, well, maybe God doesn't really mind if I go. And
there's an important lesson to learn here. When God has said no, he means no. Don't ask him again. But Balaam went back and asked again. So God says, all right, okay, you go. But you only say the words I put in your mouth. So Balaam went, and it was miserable, it was embarrassing, it was shameful, and he did not speak only the words God put in his mouth.
And he made Balak the king angrier and angrier and angrier.
And then finally he gives Balak evil counsel. He spoke words God did not give him to speak, and it cost Balaam his life. But now I'm getting ahead of the story. But since his cursing the Israelites did not work, every time he opened his mouth to curse them, blessings come out. He finally counsels Balak to send in the most beautiful women.
Wow.
And to lead the Israelite men into idolatry and into lustful excess and intercourse, and it was just horrible.
It's almost as if Balaam thought, I can bring down the people of God and please this evil king and remove myself from it to where they don't even know I'm the one who had the idea.
Right.
But the enemy's seed of an idea to have God's men and women intermarry, intermix, and begin to worship false gods brought the nation to a crashing mess.
But if Balaam had accepted God's no as no and not gone back and asked him again to change his mind, Balaam would not have been killed. And here's a spoiler alert. In Numbers chapter 31, we read that Balaam gets killed by the edge of the sword. The Israelites kill him. And in verse 16 it says, behold, these caused the sons of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against Adonai in the matter of Peor. So the plague was among the congregation of Adonai. If I remember correctly, 24,000 Israelites died. If Balaam had only just accepted God's refusal to let him go.
But he lived in a virtual reality.
Yeah.
And his eyes saw what he thought he could gain, and he probably convinced himself that he could do God a better favor by compromising with this king.
That's right. Well, there are 3 lessons we learn from Balaam. And these 3 lessons, as Robin mentioned, are found in 3 different passages in the New Testament scriptures. And the first one is in 2 Peter 2, verses 15 and 16. It says, forsaking the right way, they have gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing.
So it's the love of money.
Love of money. Wow. That's the way of Balaam.
Okay.
We all need to ask ourselves, do I have some of the way of Balaam in me? Because if you love money to the point, I mean, we all need money, and we work, and we get rewarded with money.
But is it compromising me to do what God is saying I must do?
Is the pursuit of money in any way compromising your walk with God? To that degree, you have the way of Balaam. Now, the next passage is in Jude. Jude's only 1 chapter, and this is in verses 11 through 13. And it says, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain, and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error, and perished in Korah's rebellion. So he's talking about Cain, Korah, and Balaam, mixing them together. And if we mix these 3, look at these 3 lives, we find that the error of Balaam is there's no fear of God.
And he's not loyal. to the one he's supposed to be loyal to.
If there's no fear of God, there's no real loyalty either to God's people.
No.
So the error of Balaam is just no fear of God. And
it's a fascinating passage in Jude, Grant. It's worth our listeners really reading later, because it describes the people who come into our communities and they sort of work their way in, but they're double-minded, like the waves of the sea, it says. Yeah. And their souls are mixed, and they lead people astray.
Yeah. Well, the third one is in Revelation 2, verse 14. And here Yeshua speaking says, "But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality." So that's the teaching of Balaam. And the teaching of Balaam is basically, who needs righteousness? Or it's just sex.
Yeah.
Or, well, I'm a spiritual person and God doesn't really mind this other stuff. This is not about that. And this is the teaching of Balaam, that righteous behavior doesn't really matter.
Well, you and I talked yesterday. We took a little field trip, didn't we? We drove to a place, Waco, Texas, and many of you remember back in the 90s, there was a tragedy there where a man who knew the truth, a lot about the truth, he knew the scriptures pretty well, he was a dynamic leader, but he mixed it, he polluted it.
Yeah, of course, that's David Koresh and the branch Davidians that he led. And
we went and we stood in the place where this all went south, and it was tragic because the government came against, and it became messy and confused, and there was a fire, and many, many, many people died.
80 people, men, women, and children.
But you and I had this conversation because we were reading the portion even in the car on the way home, and we said no matter where a religious group begins, if they get off track and they begin to worship false gods, that sexual impurity always enters in, because that was the thing that really concerned people about this cult that ended in Waco, Texas, and they became sexually really off track, and it just got ugly. And well, you know, such a warning.
One of the things you and I have often talked about is that sexuality that God created is a reflection of spirituality.
Because true sexual union is supposed to picture our pure worship.
And when spirituality goes off the tracks, sexuality goes off the tracks.
They're hand in hand.
When one goes into some kind of extreme or perversion, so does the other. And you can bank on it. It always happens. So,
what a warning.
You know, one of the things, and this is a caution to many people, evangelicals in particular, that talk about God's grace all the time, and God is indeed gracious. There's no question about that. But what has happened is the teaching of grace without the teaching of Torah and obedience to the commandments has led to this point where, well, if I sin, God will forgive me. I'll confess it tomorrow morning and He'll forgive me. And that basically is the teaching of Balaam.
And we no longer have standards because...
That is the teaching of Balaam.
It is. It is.
So we need to be very cautious.
The final scene in our portion is a warning, a dire warning, because the man and the woman come before the people in a place that is set apart to be sacred, and they engage in sexual immorality, and they're literally speared. And it seems like such a strange way to end the portion, but in the context of our conversation today, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Well, all right then.
Oh, well, we covered a lot of everything from virtual reality to David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. So what else is there to talk about?
Oh, my goodness. Well, again, thank you for joining us, everybody.
And again, we both encourage you to check out the Siddur Project on however you get music online.
We promise you'll love it.
And it'll be a blessing to you, we promise. So until next time, when we talk to you from Ohio.
Hopefully.
Back home in Ohio.
If all goes well.
If all goes well.
Shalom.
Our plane doesn't go down. We wish you shalom and God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.